Hello.
Oh, anyone there? Okay, let's go. I try to mix everything, the microphone and the taking slides. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here today and would like to share some thoughts and observations with you about this year's topic, the wow effect. We all know this moment. Someone is wearing a piece of jewelry and we just have to look. Maybe we even stop talking for a moment and our daily routine is interrupted. Maybe it's a brooch and the way it's made and shaped catches our eye because it looks completely new. But maybe the effect also comes from the combination of things. Who is wearing it? When? How? With what kind of style? And in what social setting? This is what people usually call the wow effect. It's a term that seems completely natural in everyday conversations, but it's rarely discussed in sociology. But what better occasion than this year's jewelry festival with the theme wow, to take a closer look at this effect. What turns an object into a piece that makes us feel a quiet wow inside when we see it? And what does this effect tell us about the social role of worn jewelry? Jewelry is much more than just decoration. It's an object full of meaning, deeply embedded in social and cultural structures. It can serve as a symbol, as a sign of belonging or difference, as a marker of status and as a statement. One example, of course, is Madeleine Albright, for example, the former US Secretary of State, who often used her brooches as a way to comment on political events. In 1994, when she criticized Saddam Hussein in her role as a US ambassador to the United Nations, an Iraqi poet responded with a public insult, calling her an unparalleled servant. Albright responded without words. At the next meeting with Iraqi officials, she wore a snake-shaped brooch. This brooch later became known as the first piece in what she called her pin diplomacy. Jewelry speaks, even when the person wearing it stays silent. And this is also a kind of wow effect. Another example is Queen Elizabeth II, who wore different brooches on 3 consecutive days during the state visit of US President Trump in 2018. In the media and on social networks around the world, this created a very big wow effect. It got viral. Many observers saw her choice of jewelry as a subtle form of commentary. Whether these were intentional political signals or just coincidences remains unclear, because she's a queen, or was a queen, and she was not allowed to give political comments. The wow effect happened anyway, also maybe without her intention. The meaning of a piece of jewelry doesn't come only from its shape or origin, but also from the context in which it is worn. Its impact depends on the situation. It comes from the interaction between the object, its surroundings, and how the public sees it. The meaning of a symbol can even separate from its wearer. Symbols are read because people want to read them, because the situation, socially, political, or emotional, suggests or even demands such a reading. In such moments, small objects, brooches, pins, or rings become carriers of shared emotions. They attract attention and create meaning. After Trump's first election, for example, there was a strong need in many European countries to take a symbolic stand. In that climate, the Queen's brooches, whether intended that way or not, become focal points for collective interpretation. In these moments, the wow effect comes not just from shine or material, but from symbolic power. And that is what makes it so effective, even in the digital space. The American sociologist Erving Goffman, in his studies on everyday self-representation, compared life to a stage. People present themselves there in the way they want to be seen. The body plays an important part in this. It is used to show one's identity, like in a play. In this presentation, jewelry is the key. It frames the face, highlights certain parts of the body, draws attention, and shapes how someone appears. The communicative value of jewelry is directed outwards, towards a social environment, and the people who see it. Jewelry is, in this sense, an interactive sign. It wants to be seen and read. The French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu expand the understanding of jewelry by describing it as a part of cultural capital. According to Bourdieu, taste is not a natural thing. It is a social learned and habitually shaped code. What is seen as tasteful or impressive depends on the social background and the kind of aesthetic education linked to it. For example, a gold signet ring might be seen as flashy or excessive in an intellectual middle-class setting. In German, there exists this nice word, Bildungsbürgertum, and this would not be appropriate in this setting. While in another context, it may be viewed as a sign of success. The wow effect then is neither objective or not universal. It is shaped by social conditions. Its impact depends on class, cultural surroundings, and the specific situation. Jewelry is a cultural code whose meaning depends on context. And that is exactly what gives it sociological relevance. This is very nice and good visible in hip-hop and rap culture. Here people play with cultural codes, breaking them, mixing them in new ways, giving them new meanings. For example, the symbolic use of the crown. Its meaning, it's deeply rooted not only in our culture, it's actually universal and is widely understood. But when it is used outside its original context, for example on the street in music videos, it creates a wow effect. Not only with the group in itself, but also for people watching from outside. One of the well-known examples is the portrait of Notorious Big. It shows him as the king of New York, wearing a simple plastic crown that had been bought for $6 in 2020. That crown was auctioned later on, and there is the picture form, of nearly $600,000, so more than double, I could say. This image shifts not only the questions of who holds power, but also what is considered valuable, and by whom. In this case, the material value of the crown was almost irrelevant. But in many other examples from hip-hop culture, the value of jewelry, including crowns, plays its central role. The visible material world is an important part of the message in that context, and creates a big wow effect. Like in the case of another rapper, Slick Rick. For him, jewelry, like the crown, is not only a symbol but also a material proof that he fought for and earned his place in society. It's not just about showing power on stage or on the street. It's also about making the journey out of a difficult social background visible. His origins are not hidden. In fact, the shine of the jewelry points to them, reflects them, and even highlighting them. It gives value not only to the person wearing it, and this is important, but also to their community and the fans who are looking at it. Wearing such a luxury says, I made it. The crown becomes a clear symbol of self-empowerment, a sign that speaks for a group that has been marginalized in American society for generations and now demands to be seen and heard. Let's have a look to another sociologist, Georg Simmel. He already wrote in 1988 about the paradox of jewelry in his essay, The Psychology of Adornment. Jewelry is never just decoration or a way to make the body more attractive, he said. But on the one hand, jewelry highlights the individual, makes them visible and stand out from their social environment. On the other hand, it binds the adorned person into a cultural and social network of meanings, makes them readable and perhaps, and more importantly, comparable. Similar emphasis, the paradox, people adorn themselves to stand out from others. And yet they do this for others. They give joy to others. That's the reason maybe also in many languages, joy is the root for the word jewelry. Only when the audience recognize and accept the performance does it have its effect. To better understand this tension between object, wearer, and audience, it's worth looking at the symbol of the crown again. Even though it is a pre-modern jewelry piece, it is still understood and used today and creates a lot of wows. Crowns are highly symbolic objects. They serve as a communication tool in the ritual of coronation. This ceremony makes the transfer of worldly power visible and lifts one person above the crowd. In almost all cultures, crown-like symbols have been used to signify authority. The material used is a key part of the effect. Crowns are usually made of shiny, light-reflecting metals and precious stone, as we see here. This material quality creates visibility. It makes the wearer stand out. The shine signals that it's something extraordinary and invites the audience to judge, and this is important. Is this jewelry appropriate? Does it suit the person's social status? Another key element of the wow effect is size. The crown rises to the center of the body. Its height and vertical shape creates a sense of majesty. The person wearing it appears taller, more powerful, lifted above others. This vertical symbolization also points to something beyond, a connection to a divine realm or a higher order. The symbolic language of crowns is deeply connected to religious or transcendental ideas. The legitimacy of power was often explained as something given by God. In medieval images, such as those of Henry II and Kunigunde, rulers are shown receiving their crown directly from a divine hand. The crown becomes a symbol of a divine order, a link between heaven and earth. So the wow effect of the crown has two sides. It comes, on one hand, from material visibility, shine, size, color, and on the other hand, from spiritual or transcendental meaning. It was seen as an epiphany, a moment when something divine or beyond understanding appears in the real world. In Simmel's view, one thing is crucial. The community must recognize this appearance and accept the symbolic meaning. Otherwise, the performance would fail. The mechanism was also visible during the coronation of King Charles III, still today. After the actual crowning, the audience gave their acclamation, a symbolic act of confirmation, and this is existing since coronation exists and more or less all coronations. Only through this response was the ceremony accepted as valid and the wearer truly legitimized. How current the symbol of the crown still is, and how timeless is seen very well in the provocations of the American President Donald Trump. He is very aware of the symbolic power of symbols of authority and uses them for his self-presentation. He repeatedly uses iconic symbols of power, like the crow, to trigger emotions, especially among his own supporters. He aims for an ironic but supportive reaction, one that creates emotional connections and symbolic unity. The shine of his provocation reflects back onto his followers. Even though they do not hold his power themselves, they feel including but supporting his breaking of the rules. It gives them a sense of sharing that power, the power to reject the rules. But this kind of performance carries risks, especially when there is no social response or when it causes confusion or irritation. Playing with symbols and meanings is, in this case of Trump, often double-coded for this reason. If the intended effect doesn't happen, there's a fallback. The outrage from political opponents generates additional media attention, while the social costs remain minimal. A brief statement like "that wasn't the intention" is often enough to reframe the discourse. In this play with ambiguity, shifting interpretations, and calculated provocation, the wow effect unfolds not despite its uncertainty, but precisely because of it, aligning with Simmel's view that social impact always relies on interaction. The example of the rapper This Uzi Vert shows that the performance and the intended wow effect can also fail. He felt compelled to remove a striking body modification, a pink diamond worth approximately $24 million that he had implanted in his forehead. Also, similar facial implants had already been worn by other artists from the hip-hop scene. In his case, the combination of the unusual placement and the extreme size of the gemstone created an especially strong wow effect. This Uzi Vert explained his step within a well-known narrative of hip-hop culture, the self-empowerment, what we already hear. Coming from humble beginnings, he was not now in a position to afford and display something so exclusive. However, the performance failed, as we see here in the picture. He was not only accused of excessive luxury and wastefulness, which is nothing special in the hip-hop culture actually, but also cause of cultural appropriation. The placement of the gemstone on his forehead was interpreted as a reference to the bindi, a culturally significant symbol from Indian tradition. In the end, the artist stated that the fan had ripped the diamond from the forehead during a stage dive, a claim that attracted significant media attention but also raised a lot of doubts because there is no proof at all for this action and it must be a very plucky one. Against the backdrop of criticism regarding cultural appropriation, it seemed almost like an attempt to discreetly make the symbol disappear, as if the wow effect had become too loud, too uncontrollable. In similar terms, the jewelry here loses its intended social context. It no longer provokes admiration, but rather irritation in a bad way, and there loses the wow effect, the positive one. In this sense, the example can also be seen as a symbolic loss of control over the sign. What was originally intended as an act of self-empowerment becomes an example of how unstable the boundary between admired excess and social reaction can be, especially when a symbol is culturally overcoded. When we talk about the wow effect, it initially seemed to be a spontaneous, subjective reaction, a feeling of wow triggered by the uniqueness of an object. But upon closer examination, this effect is deeply embedded in social processes. It is not merely an aesthetic reflex, but a socially conditioned act of intention and giving meaning. The wow effect is not permanent. It's not a stable state that a piece of jewelry always produces. Instead, it's like a test. It checks what can be said, shown or worn in a particularly social setting, and what cannot. It reveals boundaries, what is considered bold, what is excessive, what is tasteful or embarrassing. In this role, the wow effect resembles what Simmel once called the stylization of individuality under conditions of social observations. That means people use things like clothing or jewelry to express their individuality, but they always do this with an eye on others, on how they're seen and judged. As Georg Simmel described, jewelry is a medium of social interaction. It always engages with its surroundings, influencing and being influenced by them. In the dynamic exchange of shininess, meanings and feelings, the true power of jewelry and the wow moment comes to life. Thank you.